Prime Minister. Question number 1, Mr. David Winnick. For one, sir.
This morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall be having further meetings later today.
Mr. Winnick.
As the recession bites even deeper into all parts of the country, and not least in the West Midlands, is the Prime Minister aware that the country was simply not by the nonsense, but it's all due to the Gulf War? Is the Prime Minister further aware that people recognise that the recession, the devastation which is occurring in so many parts of the country, is due to disastrous policies from a discredited government that simply doesn't know from day to day where it's going?
Well, I must say to the honourable gentleman, I certainly accept there is a downturn in the economy, and I've made that clear. And I have made that clear. But the honourable gentleman must recognise that that downturn, firstly in terms of investment and growth, comes from a very high level after a very lengthy period of growth, and it is absolutely essential that we take the appropriate decisions now to ensure we have a low inflation economy in the 1990s.
Joe Hayes.
Greatly encouraged by the fact that British investment outstrips Germany, France and Italy. And does he not think that British industry is getting rather fed up by the party opposite, telling them continually that there's no end in sight to the recession and no economic good news? Does he not think they're becoming the party of the abominable no-men?
As my honourable friend says, our investment record over recent years has been extremely good. A record, in fact, unmatched elsewhere in the community.
Mr. Speaker, since it's clear that before too many weeks have passed, the government will be forced to cut interest rates, why don't they do it now and save British industries and British home buyers absolutely pointless pain?
The right honourable gentleman shouldn't be so desperate. If he panics in opposition, what might he do in government?
Mr. Speaker, first, all observable panic is on his side of the House. And secondly, he's soon going to have a very good opportunity to find out the strength of Labour in government. May I say to the Prime Minister, it's all very well for him to try to avoid the question. It isn't his business that he spent a lifetime building up that's now threatened. It isn't his factory that's facing closure, and it isn't his mortgage that threatens to put him and his family out of his home. Isn't he ashamed that Britain alone, of all the major industrial countries under his government, is facing prolonged slump, extended slump, because of his policies?
The right honourable gentleman has clearly overlooked the fact. I will come directly to the question. The right honourable gentleman has clearly overlooked the fact that there is a recession in a number of countries. On the question of interest rates, the right honourable gentleman misunderstands the importance of interest rates. Nobody wants interest rates unduly high, but we need to ensure that we have a low inflation economy, and that is the means to ensure we have it.
This is Elizabeth Peacock.
I'm sure my right honourable friend is aware of the many Gulf support groups that have been set up throughout the country to offer help and support to those families who have loved ones fighting in the Gulf. Will he join with me today to send best wishes to the two groups in my constituency in Battle and Tahiti who are doing a superb job?
I'm certainly happy to do as my honourable friend requests. I'm delighted at the number of Gulf support groups there are around the country, and I wish them all well.
Mr. Dennis Skinner.
Number 2.
I refer the honourable gentleman to the answer I gave some moments ago.
Mr. Skinner.
Can the Prime Minister tell us how this war can have any moral purpose, any democratic purpose, when British troops risk being slaughtered on the desert sand while the Kuwaiti royal family are gallivanting round the gambling dens and casinos living it up? And when the war is over and those Kuwaiti stooges, American stooges, are back in power with all their luxury. Some of those British troops will be coming back to the dole queue, the poll tax and cardboard city. Is that the classless society that he talks about?
I had always thought that the honourable gentleman was against the sort of actions we've seen in Kuwait by the Iraqis. I am sorry that I am wrong.
Dame Piggott-Fenner.
Number 3,
Well, that was a bloody awful question.
I refer my honourable friend to the answer I gave some moments ago.
Dame Piggott-Fenner.
During the course of my right honourable friend's busy day, I'm sure he will share my concern about the current proposals for reform of the Common Agricultural Policy. Does he agree with me that we shouldn't accept any reform that penalises the efficient British farmer, because that won't help the British consumer?
Yes, I do agree with my honourable friend about that. I think I share the view of the majority of the House that further reform of the Common Agricultural Policy is needed, but that must make European agriculture more open to market forces and not less. And as my right honourable friend, the Minister of Agriculture, has been making clear in Brussels, we will very strongly resist any proposals that penalise the efficient farmer and in so doing place the burden upon consumers.
Ashton.
Speaker, does the Prime Minister recall the very welcome words of the Foreign Secretary at the weekend in which he said, when the fighting is over, we must be prepared to use the peace wisely? May I therefore put to him this proposition? If the United Nations provides the authority for fighting the war in the Gulf, then the United Nations should have the responsibility for building the peace which follows it. Does he agree?
We shall certainly be discussing both within the United Nations and beyond with the Arab states who have the primary interest what is necessary for the future security of the region.
Mr. Patrick Nichols.
Number 4, sir.
I refer my honourable friend to the answer I gave some moments ago.
Patrick Nichols.
Mr. Speaker, has my right honourable friend noted that for the last 4 months, inflation has been running at something like 1.9% per annum? Doesn't that show, in fact, that the government's policy on reducing inflation is actually working? And doesn't such a policy offer a far more certain way towards eventual interest rate reductions than the sort of soft option being advocated by the leader of the opposition by way of a devaluation?
My honourable friend is quite right. Soft options tend to lead to hard times. Our policies are succeeding in reducing inflation. And as inflation comes down, there will be the opportunity for sustained interest rate reductions.
Does
the Prime Minister agree with me?
Wait. Remember.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime
So did I. Don't run it.
Does the Prime Minister agree with me that in keeping with the spirit and purposes of the United Nations, consent to the Allied military action is limited to ending the occupation by Iraq of Kuwait, and that the maintenance of peace or the achieving of peace and security in the region can be obtained by other means, and that it must include the removal of nuclear and chemical weapons from throughout the region?
Now, the present aims are set out perfectly clearly in the Security Council resolutions. Upon the second point of the Honourable Lady's question, I think that is a matter that everyone will wish to address when they discuss what happens after the conclusion of this conflict.
Mr. David Wiltshire.
Number 5, sir. I refer my honourable friend to the answer I gave some moments ago.
David Wiltshire.
Does my right honourable friend agree that whatever one's party politics, we should all welcome the proposed abolition of the apartheid laws in South Africa? And does he also agree that whatever we may think about the past in that country, the best way to support that government now is to help it make those changes as quickly as possible and to begin the process of reintegrating South Africa into the world community of nations?
I do agree with my honourable friend, and not only, of course, to support the government, but perhaps more relevantly to support the people of South Africa, all of them. President de Klerk has taken a truly massive move forward, and I think it is now for the international community to respond. I hope very much they will do so. I have already discussed this with the Commonwealth Secretary-General and with President Bush, and my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, raised it with European Community Foreign Ministers yesterday. I also spoke about it this morning to Mr. Hawke, the Australian Prime Minister. He and I both very strongly agree that the time has come to begin lifting the Commonwealth measures, in particular the sports sanctions, particularly where the sports are integrated in South Africa. All in all, the announcement by President de Klerk was a most welcome move forward.
Norman Hogg.
I refer the honourable gentleman to the answer I gave some moments ago.
Norman Hogg.
Is the Prime Minister aware that the naval base at Rosyth in Scotland employs 5,000 naval and civilian personnel? And is he further aware that we have had ministerial assurances that in the defence review all the options would be considered impartially? Is he further aware that there exists a secret report and study which shows that there is an intention to close Rosyth in the shortest possible timescale? Would the Prime Minister not agree with me that that is disgraceful at a time when our naval personnel are serving in the Gulf and that their home base is being threatened in this way?
I can say to the honourable gentleman that no decision has been made to close Rosyth or any naval base, and we fully recognise the implications which closure would have on employment in the area, and they would be fully considered and examined before any such decision was taken.
Mr. Hazelhurst.
If President Bush raises the question of transatlantic air routes, could my right honourable friend assure the House that he will sustain the government's position outlined by the Secretary for Transport in very strong and sensible defence of British civil aviation?
My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, is discussing these matters, and I can assure my honourable friend he will defend our interests very robustly.
Mr. Alexide.
But how does the Prime Minister justify the salary of £225,000 per annum being paid to the new chairman of British Coal? Since previous British chairman had a large industry and a comparatively small salary. And since the present chairman is inheriting a very small industry and will have a large salary, and some of us suspect that his terms of reference is to make it even smaller still.
The gentleman concerned is being paid according to his ability.
Mr. Roger
Number 7, sir.
I refer my honourable friend to the answer I gave some moments ago.
Mr. Roger Mount.
Reverting to the question of reform. Reverting to the question of reform of the common agricultural policy, would my right honourable friend not agree that if the Germans and the French wish to subsidise their small farmers for social reasons, then they should be free to do so? And if the British taxpayer next year is going to spend £4 billion on agricultural subsidies in order apparently to produce inadequate incomes for the farmers and excessively high prices for the consumers, isn't it time that we considered repatriating agricultural policy so that we can decide here what is best for Britain?
The common agricultural policy is an established element of the European community, but I share the view of my honourable friend that it is an unsatisfactory one, and for that reason we are seeking reform of it.
Williams.
Aware that a measure of the underlying weakness of our economy is in the fact that if we exclude North Sea oil, over the last 3.5 years at constant prices, we run a deficit on trade of £85 billion. Can he tell us why he believes that we can solve that problem with the same rate of exchange that caused it?
The right honourable gentleman, I think, is very selective in his criticism. He wholly forgets over recent years that we have had 8 successive years of growth. We've had a period in which our investment has grown faster than Germany, than Italy, than France, and anyone else in the European community. And we have now a wholly different industrial position from that we inherited in 1979.
Urban.
I refer my honourable friend to the answer I gave some moments ago.
Urban.
Is my right honourable friend aware of the concern felt
about the European Commission's draft directive on capital adequacy by many firms operating in the financial services sector. Does he agree that some of the requirements imposed as to capital adequacy are excessive? And will he make vigorous representations to ensure that where appropriate, they're reduced?
Of the concerns that my honourable friend raises, he will know that firms who act purely as advisors are already exempt from the requirements of the Capital Adequacy Directive. We certainly do not wish to see inappropriate or unnecessary capital requirements imposed on any UK investment firm.
Baron.
Refer the honourable gentleman to the answer I gave some moments ago.
Under the government, under the private bill procedure of this House, have also accepted neutrality, their neutrality, to be one of support for a private bill. Last Thursday night, the Southampton Rapid Transit Bill was defeated by the use of the payroll vote, including 10 members of the Cabinet, two of them members of the War Cabinet that were suspended when that vote took place. Can the Prime Minister tell us what's changed the government mind? Was it political judgment or political spite?
The honourable gentleman should know that was the individual decision of members of this House.